One of the things that's going to be important for this class is to use design diagrams to help you work your way through the design process. Okay, so these are things that you sketch out. Typically, I do them by hand. That helps with your thought process and makes sure that you realize exactly what's trying to be connected to where and what the relationship between all the modules and that sort of thing. So I wanted to give you an example for our first lab. All right, so in our first lab, we are having hardware as the target. So think of a box here. All right, so I make a box. And this box, the function of this box is to connect the hardware to our design. So we have a design inside the box. Our design is going to be really easy. Okay, so in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to connect the switches. The switches have a specific variable name. We'll talk about that in other videos, but it has to be SW. You don't have flexibility there because there is a constraint file that you use later on that actually assigns a variable name to the switches. We can use the switches as an input, so we could draw an arrow here coming in. And there are 16 switches, so typically we would draw a little mark that shows that we have 16 for this particular variable, 16 bits for this particular variable. The output has LEDs, and they are called LED. That's the variable name. There's no flexibility there. And there's 16 bits there as well. Okay. Well, our design could have inputs as well, and they don't have to be named the same thing as what our hardware pins would be named. In fact, that gives us some flexibility. We can make the assignment when we do the top level module. Okay. So let's say I had an input and I called it XN. It would make sense it's the same size. So we're going to have XN as the input to our design and Y out as the output to our design. Now we do have name flexibility on inputs and outputs for our own designs. Okay, we don't have to use XN, for example. We could have used AN. All right, so this is the initial setup. All right, so later on, I'm going to walk you through the Vivado tools, and we are going to take this top module, and I'm going to call it top pass invert. Okay, so we're passing the switch connections through to the LEDs, and we are inverting them. If you remember the previous video, we talked about when the switch is up, the LED should be off. When the switch is down, the LED should be on. All right, so we are tying our switches to the inputs, and the output of our design goes to the LED. All right, so that leaves us with, what goes in to our design. All right, so think of design as being something inside of a module or a box, whatever concept helps you think of that. I think of it as a box. All right, so at this point, what we'd like to do is figure out what goes in the box. Well, this design is intentionally trivial. We take the input. We know it has 16 bits. All right, and the thing that we're going to do is we're going to invert this bit by bit. All right, so a symbol for doing that would look like our regular invert symbol. And the fact that we have 16 means that it's going to be a bitwise invert of each bit location. And then on the output, Y out. Okay, so that's our design. That's what we have. And that in itself has inputs and outputs, so I can draw a box around that. And that would be our design. Of course, we're going to do more complicated designs in class as we go through this class. But this is essentially what's inside the blue box. Okay? So you might say, well, Dr. Thompson, this seems trivial. Why didn't you just make it all one box? Why did you go through this extra step of putting your design in a box? And the answer to that is we want the flexibility to be able to test our design in a number of ways. We could put it into the hardware, like we're going to do in this lab setup, but we could also have a software test bench where we take, another box, all right, and in software we control inputs. Maybe I would call it AN. I have name flexibility if I'm doing a test bench. Okay, let me move this around a little bit so I can label it. Okay, and then I could call this A out. I'm intentionally using a different variable name just to illustrate the point. 16 bits. All right, and then I could take my design, copy that, and instantiate it into this test bench where I know I would make the connections. Y out would correspond to A out and X in would correspond to A in. All right, and I could have a test bench that I do in software for the same design element. Okay, so that's what we're going to end up doing in this class. We're going to have encapsulated designs. This box itself could also have boxes that are further down, so it can consist of other instantiations of modules. And we'll get to that, but that's the intro that I want. And it's important for every design that you have to have a diagram in mind. Okay, that's one of the things we're going to emphasize. If we see you sitting in the lab and you're having problems with your design, getting that to work, we're going to want to see the diagram that you have that you're working from, because it's really hard to make these things work by just trying to imagine what the design diagram would look like. You really need to draw it out so that you can get it right.